Awesome. Okay. Well, everyone, welcome. It's been a crazy long blue screen since we've been knocked over by COVID. So we're super happy to be back and actually doing something virtually, having this meetup finally. So thanks for everyone for coming. We have everyone from Melbourne, obviously, but then also overseas. So a bunch of people from across Australia and around the world, which is cool. For those of you who don't know SecTalks, we host technical security talks with CTF challenges or challenges that you can do to try and just uplift your technical skills. So we've got a no BS policy. We do have sponsors, but we don't have vendors trying to pitch their wares and so forth. So it's really about that knowledge share. So this week we're going to have two speakers. No capture the flag, but I'll fill you in on how we can get some of those juicy prizes we have as well. So, as I said, we are fully virtual probably for a while as Melbourne's still in lockdown. We've got a few things coming up, but likely the next one we'll have is August 26th or so. So we'll do it virtual as well. So I'm going to cover off a few kind of housekeeping things as we go into the next one. I've definitely missed a lot of people, as have the rest of the organizers. It's been sad not ever seeing everyone in person, but good to be back. So in terms of things coming up, HackerOne is having a security app conference, also virtual, I believe, on the 20 to 22nd of October. There's a few CTFs coming up as well that you might be interested, as well as one of the Trace Labs search parties. If you like a bit of open source intelligence and finding missing persons, that's a good one to do. And I think they've got some badges now as well, so you can actually participate and get the badges for it. There's InCTF and of course the DEF CON finals, which for the first time I think are being hosted virtually. So a few teams from the previous years in there, but some new ones as well. So we'll be watching that. You can't participate in that one as it's all done now. So quick segment as well for some companies that are looking for hires at the moment. So you've got Privosec Red in Melbourne. They're looking for a senior pen tester. BugCrowd is looking for two positions that you can be in Melbourne, but they're remote. So chat to Codingo. Triskel Labs has two roles. One is entry level for doing reports and QAs kind of analysis. So that's good for anyone just out of uni or even going into it, something like that. Contact Nick at Triskel Labs. And of course, CyberSec People has a number of roles going for pen testing and GRC here in Melbourne. So obviously COVID has hit us pretty hard and we've got virtually almost everything, but when we were in person, we had some amazing sponsors that have been with us for a long time and supported everything we do. So huge thanks to PwC. They usually provide the entire venue and drinks and the room and all that. So we really appreciate what they have done for us and we can't wait to get back into that sweet location. Same goes for Privosec. They've supported the infrastructure, the prizes for a long time, the bar tab, and I'll go into what we're doing with the bar tab this month in terms of what we're actually exchanging it for rather than drinking here remotely. We also have CyberSec People that has provided books all throughout the year, even before COVID started. So we're going to have two of these available today just for doing some small things. And you can win some of those books if you're happy providing us with your PII. And of course, CyberGym. It was unfortunate that the moment we started being able to utilize their venue, COVID struck. So I'm sure at the end of the, when we get a vaccine or something like that, we're going to be back in there. So thanks to CyberGym as well for supporting us this year. And of course, really big thanks to our current event sponsors. This was something we were pretty blown away by because we hadn't had something like this before in terms of vendors just coming up and offering us something that's a lot of value. Usually we have prizes that are well within our budget, which are really genuine and we appreciate, but this was pretty cool. So this month we have both Maltego and Intel 471 providing some classic licenses, as well as Maltego's gone and provided a 10% off coupon code. So that's off their classic licenses subscription. You can go in and use that promo code there. So you may want to screenshot that one. And I think they reserve the right to block it if too many people spam that across coupon sites all over the web. And so I'll quickly just touch on what we're doing with the virtual swag. First thing you need to know is that we do need your first and last name if we're giving you out one of these licenses. That's just the rule. there's 3 ways to really grab one of these today. The first that we're offering for 2 people, a license and a book, are if you complete just the feedback form at the end of the event. Just let us know how the talks were, how you felt, what you want to see next. The next one is if you ask a question on YouTube chat or Slack for the speaker, which we'll ask them in the Q&A time. Pretty important, and we'll select that randomly of someone who's asked a question that we were able to ask the speaker. And the last one is we thought about it for a while, and we're like, how can it be meaningful for these licenses? How can we, just do it in a way that gives back to the people who actually need it most? So we thought about it long and hard, and we came up with an idea that if you can email us or tweet us in just the way that Maltego might help you, whether you're doing, OSINT to find missing persons, whether you're just using it for work and they haven't been able to afford that yet, or whatever your use case may be, just send us a message and we will look at that and provide some of those licenses for you. Cool. And obviously the link is there if you want to have a chance at grabbing one of those in the book. If you trust us with the short links, feel free to, but some people have been burned by us before. I get it. So you can go and do the feedback form there. It's pretty quick, so I'll let you screenshot that or pause it for a second. And then I just want to quickly get into the fact that COVID has been pretty crazy, pretty hard. I am sure some of you are aware, not everyone is coping too well with it. And for the past few months, we haven't been spending the regular prize money for speakers and booze and things like that. So these are really meaningful organizations that we either spend a lot of time on or we know have actively helped people in our community, especially in infosec. So we're going to be donating the money to Missing Persons Advocacy Network, Trace Labs, Beyond Blue, and Lifeline, all really important. And I think it's a good cause that hopefully people are okay trading that for booze this month. If you guys want to get in touch with us, obviously there's the Slack channel there. You can email us in if you have any talk ideas or if you want to give a fireball talk. It's 20 minutes if you want to help set up CTFs. Anything you want to do to help us out is good here. And of course, you can contact all the organizers with their Twitter handles there just below. Now, it's a pleasure to welcome you, Mark. I will just say a quick introduction before he comes up on stage, and that's the fact that you don't see too many executives these days being active in tradecraft and sharing their knowledge. And to be honest, that's how we virtually met. I was just leaning on a lot of his knowledge and then passing that on to my team, and we were studying this, and then I realized there was just a person behind this. So I was really excited when Mark agreed to share and contribute to the community here at SecTalks. So yeah, welcome up to the stage, and Mark, feel free to share your screen and hit off your talk. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Can everybody see my screen? Hopefully that's a yes. Interrupt me if it's not. I can't see the chat at the moment. Thanks very much for the opportunity to chat. So, I mean, I live here in Europe. It's pretty early in the morning. When I say pretty early, it's about 10 a.m., which is still pretty early for me. But so kicking on, thanks for the introduction. Again, I am Australian. I hope I've still got a bit of an Australian accent. Some of my friends have told me I'm losing it a little, but it's because I haven't lived in Australia for about 7 years now, even though I do try and get back every year, although it won't be happening anytime soon with COVID-19. Previously, my background, I'm the CEO and founder of Intel 471. Prior to that, I was the chief researcher at Eyesight Partners, so now since it's been acquired by FireEye. And before that, I was a technical specialist at the Australian Federal Police. So my background originally is software engineering, so software engineering and programming. I'm from Perth originally, lived in Canberra when I was working for the AFP. But I guess more uniquely, I've got over a decade of experience researching and tracking top-tier threat actors across both government and the commercial space. So all the main motivations of threat actors I've researched, whether it's nation states, doing espionage, financially motivated cyber criminals.
Hey Mark, we'll just make sure your slides are up. Sorry, just in case your slides aren't showing, just hit that share screen.
Are they not up?
No, not yet. So
okay, let me just.
No problem. You were up. It was just your slides, not yet.
Okay, I've got to share the screen again. I think stop screen, share screen. I'm just doing. How's that?
Give me a second. Yeah, it's up now, so all cool.
Cool, let me just full screen it. How's that? Full screen?
Sure is.
Perfect, thanks. So yeah, over a decade, like I said, I've done a lot of work with nation state threat actors, researching them, financially motivated, which is really what our focus is here, and hacktivist or politically motivated threat actors. I'm probably in a unique situation as the CEO of an intelligence company. I really get to talk to a lot of different organizations globally, different stages of maturity when it comes to their threat intel programs. Like I said, all over the world, pretty much every sector you think of that would have a intelligence program. So I have a unique insight into what people are doing, what's good and what's bad. And hopefully, this talk gives you some of those things, what I see as in what's good, what's bad, and kind of more trends to do with what we see in more mature and more successful threat intelligence programs than ones that aren't. So kicking off, I wanted to define for everybody my definition or the definition of cyber threat intelligence. Cyber, the cyber domain. I'm not a fan of the word. I know a lot of people are not. I think that argument's lost, at least with deep and dark web. Like, I hate that term, deep and dark web, with a passion. I feel like I have a chance of changing people's impression of what deep and dark web is, but I think cyber's gone. That argument's lost. There's a lot of domains for warfare, where it's air, sea, land, space. Cyber's a new one, I'm sorry. Involves computers. Good enough to just say cyber's computers. Threat, I think it's important to threat we know as a person or a group with an intent and a way of working. TTPs is a way of working, so tactics, techniques, and procedures. It's very important. Threat is a person or group, not a piece of malware. The malware is not the threat, the person using it is. And then intelligence, if we define intelligence, the output of the intelligence cycle. And I'll talk about the intelligence cycle and how to implement it further in this talk. So just kicking off, this is kind of the general information security view of intelligence. And this is, across the sector, across the world, people generally view that threat intelligence, mostly the security industry mostly appears to take the view that indicators of compromise are the best approach to initiate and drive the incident response process. So when I'm saying indicator of compromise, I'm talking like bad IP address, bad MD5 hash, investigate this controller, investigate this malware sample. But from my perspective, there's really two approaches, and they're very complementary to threat intelligence. And I'm not favoring one or the other, but what I just described as, starting at IOCs or an incident is incident-centric, and the reality is most of the industry focuses on this. But I think it's missing another kind of approach, which I call like the actor-centric approach. From what I see, most mature organizations are doing both of these approaches simultaneously. So they're doing incident-centric intelligence and actor-centric intelligence at the same time. And typically you require different skills for different people. One more technically orientated people seem to be better at kind of incident-centric intelligence, more kind of traditional intelligence out of, say, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, military seem to be better at the actor-centric intelligence. If you have the skills, and I encourage everybody that works in threat intelligence or want to get into threat intelligence to try to have or gain the skills to do both, because there's a very, very small number of people globally that are able to do both. And it's awesome for your career if you're able to do both. So starting with the incident-centric approach, this is really where you're responding to an incident, or anytime you initiate the intelligence process through indicators of compromise. So again, bad IP address, bad MD5 hash, etc. And you want to build off that. So you want to look at that incident, you want to extract the TTPs, so tactics, techniques, and procedures, and campaign associated with that. And then ideally you want to get to the actor. So when I say TTP, so let's say you get a piece of malware, you want to understand, okay, what are the features of the malware? How does that malware maintain persistence across the network, across the system? How was it campaigned? How was it distributed? Was it sent through spam? Was it dropped through something else? We want to understand that. And then we want to go to the actor. So the actor, who it was, why, how do they operate? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to get money? Are they trying to drop ransomware on your systems to encrypt all your stuff? Are they an espionage actor that's trying to steal intellectual property or steal your executives' communications? It's really, really important for that. I know a lot of people in the security fields say that attribution is not valuable or not, and I would claim that I think attribution is completely valuable for a business. And the reason is, so let's say let's say you're working for an organization and they're negotiating a global deal with an Asian country, let's say China. They're negotiating a deal with China. They're going to negotiate a price for something over 10 years. And you're responding to an incident, you're an incident responder, you're responding to an incident that's impacted the secretary to the CEO's system. It's been compromised. You respond to the incident. How are you going to respond to that incident if it's a cyber espionage actor versus a cyber criminal is totally different. If it's a cyber criminal, it's a massively distributed attack. That assistant to the CEO was not specifically targeted. You can probably just reformat the system and move on. But if it's a nation state, in that case, Chinese actor who's motivated, trying to get the executive's communications, obviously it's super important, and that has a massive business impact for that organization, especially to do with the business context of negotiating their deal in China. When I say attribution, I don't actually mean, it doesn't have to necessarily mean this is the person behind the keyboard. This is, this person. I think just getting to the point where you can understand, okay, this is a motivation, this is the why, we think it's a Chinese cyber espionage actor trying to do this for this reason. That's good enough. Giving a PLA, People's Liberation Army unit number, only of use to a very small number of organizations. If it's a criminal side, I think I would say sometimes figuring out who the actual person behind the keyboard is value. If you want to, gives you an option to go down the law enforcement route, if you like. But as a whole, I would say attribution is valuable. So pros of the incident-centric approach: if you're responding to an incident within your organization, you're able to say, okay, direct relevance is established. You can afford and justify spending cycles and effort on it. Also directly allows you to identify threat actors directly targeting your organization. And also doing that process traditionally will flush out additional indicators of compromise. You can get out some additional IOCs out of the process. You can feed it back into your security controls to look for other kind of linked incidents within your organization as well. Cons of the approach is 100% reactive. So you're reacting to the things that have already happened within your organization. The business impact might have already occurred. If we go back to that example of a Chinese espionage group targeting the personal assistant to a CEO, they might have already stolen the executive's communications, so that impact has already occurred. It's also very focused on just the attack surface type attacks. So if we look at, say, cybercrime, for an example, cybercrime, the process a criminal needs to go through to attack somebody, or with malware, there's a big stage of process they need. They need hosting for their malware. They need a way to distribute it or get the malware onto a system, whether that's spamming or buying an install from somebody else. They need a way to crypt or pack their malware to evade antivirus. There's all these different enablers that, say, different threat actors need, and all this really covers is more the technically orientated kind of bits that touch the attack surface. And with this incident-centric approach on its own, it's very difficult to be predictive. So the other side of that is the actor-centric approach, and this is the reverse of that. So we start with the actor, who are the actors that would impact us? Who are the actors that would impact organizations like us? So our sector, what are the enabling actors for that threat activity? And that's where we start at, like, the actor, and we do the reverse. Start the actor, we want to enumerate how do they operate from a TTPs and campaigns perspective, and ideally we want to get it indicators of compromise. The reality is we're not always going to get it IOCs, but that's what we're trying to do. Pros of this approach: enables your organization to be proactive and predictive. You're able to provide additional context around an actor's motivations and their abilities before an incident occurs. It's very much can focus on the business process of an attacker rather than just the piece of it that it touches an organization's attack service. But there's a lot of cons to this approach. So I don't recommend anybody does this approach solely. But relevance of your organization might not be readily apparent. Like, how do you justify your time doing this against a certain type of actor? It's very challenging to gain and maintain access where threat actors operate. You really need a lot of analytical effort to kind of understand and get different types of information, fuse it together and make it relevant to your organization. Like, why is that threat actor important to us? You really need to keep a regularly updated list, and prioritize list at that, as in what threat actors should be focusing on. And also you might be missing IOCs. I mean, that might be by design, you're focusing on different enablers for threat activity, or it might be that you're just looking at an actor that hasn't yet deployed any attacks live in the world, if you think of the nature of an indicator compromise means there's attacks already happening in the wild as well. So you might be missing that as well. So moving on, when I talk about, and I always do, when I do talks about cyber threat intelligence programs, I always put a $ in front of cyber for it, because I want people to understand cyber threat intelligence programs are pretty expensive. There's a reason why it's mostly only governments doing it. Very, very expensive. And then defining, I stole this definition. I like it from the FBI. I've been using it for a couple of years now. This definition of intelligence is information that has been analyzed and refined so that it's useful to policymakers in making decisions, specifically decisions about potential threats. And I've bolded a few terms here. Analyze, so analyze, a person does analysis. There's not a computer doing analysis, that's a person. Refined, I would say the term refined as in somebody has made intelligence or made this information relevant to an organization. And then next part, useful to policymakers in making decisions. That tells you, what's the intelligence consumer or stakeholder in this case. In this case, they say policymakers, being government. But I think in the corporate sector, you could say that's decision makers. So chief information security officer and above, so security leadership or organizational leadership. And I didn't bold potential threats, but again, talking about threats being people and groups with motivations and a way of working. So I got this kind of pop quiz around, the US government's intelligence community spending is massive. Like they're spending way more money than anybody else. There's a number one customer or stakeholder for the US intelligence community. And then what are the deliverables for that customer? So this is copy and paste from the Washington Post. And this is not made to make fun of any of the President Trump. I'll say, so on Friday, the Washington Post reported that in a break from precedent established by previous modern presidents, President Trump rarely, if ever, reads the president's daily brief. So the president's daily brief is a briefing that's given to each president. It's typically done every day. Like I said, it depends how I said, what are deliverables for a customer? Different types of people consume information differently. So President Obama received written information on an iPad-like device. He would provide that, and he would be provided that, and he would read that every day. That's how he consumed information in a written form. Trump is more kind of visual person, so he receives oral briefings. So somebody presents him, shows pictures, graphs, etc. Like I said, I don't say this to make fun of people. I just show this to be like, as an intelligence professional, you need to understand who your briefing or who your information is for, and adjust your deliverable based on how they best consume information. So ultimately, CTI programs are about reducing risk. And if you look at their kind of generic risk equation, risk equals probability times impact. Hopefully that's not the first time you've seen that. But ultimately, we want to, from a threat intelligence program, we want to inform people in how does the threat picture, or how does the threat landscape, as people say, how does it impact the probability and impact of an event occurring? So what is the probability of an event occurring, and what is the impact to our organization if it does? So how can we inform decision makers to create decisions which are going to change the probability equation of how something might happen, or change the impact if it does? Sometimes you can't change the probability and you can only reduce the impact. Other times you can't change the impact, you can only reduce the probability. But that's really what we're trying to do at the end of the day, reduce risk. So ultimately, and this is a kind of what we've written up before, that cyber threat intelligence is about understanding the internal and external factors that impact probability and impact of risks, so decisions can be made that reduce risk. So moving on to further definitions, I want to define threat for you. So threat from our perspective is a person or a group with a motivation, intent, and way of working. Malware is not a threat, the person using it is. This is probably one of the biggest, challenges or mistakes I see when I speak to organizations. They very much think, okay, what can you tell me about malware? I'm like, I can tell you a lot about malware. But as a threat intelligence team, we should be focusing on who uses the malware. What are they trying to do? A lot of different malware families, you could say, are, you would think it's cybercrime or criminal in nature. but nation state actors are using them, or they work with the people, the criminals using that malware, and if they get interesting accesses, interesting breaches, they can then provide it to the nation state actor as well. But ultimately, a threat intelligence program tracks threats. So we're tracking people and groups over time. And so the types of threats you should be interested in, what's directly targeting my organization? I mean, that's an easy one. What incidents are we responding to? What samples are we being sent? What are we being targeted with? The next one is targeting other organizations like me. So other people in my sector, I very much encourage organizations to share within their sector, share with other organizations like them, share with an ISAC. I don't know if you know what an ISAC is, but basically information sharing group, very sector specific. I'd say the biggest one going around is the FS ISAC. So the financial services ISAC, share with those. We're interested in threat actors that are enablers for actors targeting your organization and your sector. So enablers, when I talk about, say, hosters, so bulletproof hosting, for example. So from a cybercrime perspective, one of the biggest enablers for a huge amount of cybercrime is bulletproof hosting. So these are criminally run hosting networks that provide this service. It's very expensive, and they provide a service to host criminal infrastructure, be it exploit kits, command and control servers, etc. They're, like I said, very expensive. So if a criminal is using them, you would have to say that they're quite successful at what they do. And then all prioritized by business impact. The intent of the threat actors, because like I said, in that example of a Chinese cyber espionage actor hitting or attacking the PA of a CEO, is obviously the intent, and because the intent can drive the business impact. That will drive the prioritization of what order of threat actors we should be looking at. So with threat actors, we want to understand who they are, who are they working with, what are their associations with enabling actors, what are they motivated by, so intent, what are their technical skills and abilities, and who are they targeting? And we need to track this over time. Just like as security professionals and security programs mature over time, just to the threat actors, and we need to track their TTPs, how they're working, track that over time. So I gave the example of, at the end, I said, intelligence is the output of the intelligence cycle. And this is the intelligence cycle. It's been around for years and years and decades. This is how typically government agencies work. Starts with planning and direction. From that, you do some collection, then do some processing of that collection, then you do some analysis and production, and then you disseminate the intelligence to a stakeholder or an intelligence customer. And based on the feedback from that, the process begins again. I think that every organization with intelligence function should adopt the intelligence cycle. It enables you to have clear kind of breakup of responsibilities in different jobs. It allows you to generate key performance indicators for what you're doing. It allows you to see what's working and what's not. It might allow you to see, what intelligence vendors are successful and what not, or what are meeting what you need and who aren't. But overall, like I said, it's definitely not perfect by any means, but I think this is the best approach we've got at the moment, in my opinion. So starting with the planning and direction phase, first we want to identify, who are our key customers and stakeholders. So who are the customers of an intelligence program, and what are their intelligence needs and requirements, and how do we prioritize them? The reality is, if you start a new intelligence program, there's going to be a huge number of intelligence requirements that you're going to need, and the reality is you're never going to have enough resources to satisfy everybody. But you need to kind of prioritize that and figure out, what are the top intelligence needs for your organization and what are at the bottom. And, it's always a hard decision to make for an organization. Some people get support and other people don't, but that's the reality of what needs to be done. So typical customers or intelligence customers or stakeholders within an organization starts at your executive, so head of security and above. For my opinion, that should be their number one intelligence customer. For any Intel program, like when I go back to that decision, that definition about being made for policymakers, so in the corporate sector, I'd say made for decision makers, that's CISO and above. That should be your number one intelligence customer. But other intelligence customers, we have security operations, risk teams, incident response, vulnerability management, fraud, M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, i.e. so enabling your organization to do due diligence for a potential acquisition, insider threats, and red teaming, which you'll see in the next talk as well. So one of the biggest mistakes I see globally in threat intelligence programs is focusing on the security operations, or the SOC, the security operations center, being the primary intel customer. I would say they're such a key, giving intelligence support to a SOC or security operation is a very, very high priority for intelligence teams, but I don't think it's number one. I see this so many times. I see that, you're looking at an intelligence program, and what they've really built is a better SOC or a better detection team or a better incident response team, or they're better at analyzing intrusions and taking that incident-centric approach and take a piece of malware. They can tell you what group it is. They can say this is Fancy Bear, and Fancy Bear operates like this and that. And it's like, okay, it's all that. Has merit. I'm not saying it's not valuable to a company. It definitely is, but it's not CTI. Like I said, this is so many times speaking to organizations, the CISOs and the executives, they're dropping a lot of money into building an intelligence program. They think they're going to get the support. They don't. This is what happens, and they get disillusioned. I've seen so many people just disillusioned with threat intelligence as a whole, because that's not what they expected would happen. But as I said, this is what I see as the number one issue. Saying that, like I said, the security operation should 100% get a lot of support from a CTI team, but it shouldn't be the number one customer. One of the guys I know really, really well, he was hired just about 4 or 5 years ago. He was hired in a very large US organization to build a threat intelligence program. He had a little bit of resources to start, not a huge amount. What he did was, first thing he just focused on was just supporting the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, and the execs. Like, that's all he did at the start. He did that. They very much saw the benefit, and security operations got a little neglected at the start. But by supporting the executives, they saw the value, and they rained down cash and additional funding to allow him to support other intel stakeholders. And that's what allowed him in the future to support the security operations and the incident response. That organization now is probably one of our most mature customers from a threat intelligence program perspective. And about 4 or 5 years ago, it was nothing, basically. So it just shows you, support the CISO, focus on their number one. Unfortunately, security operations might miss out to start, but you'll show them the value, and then they will understand and see the value of threat intel, and then they'll add additional resources as a result. One of the mistakes I see is skills misalignment. It's very much like when I said about incident-centric intelligence versus actor-centric intelligence, and being very rare for a person to be able to do both. I very much see that someone who provides intelligence support to the executives as being more of a kind of traditional intelligence professional, so more someone out of government, law enforcement, and less technical. That's just what I see as a whole. And these kind of traditional intel professionals seem to be better at delivering intelligence for that kind of C-level, doing briefings, less technical information, writing 1 or 2 page high-level reporting. That's just the reality of what I see. Very key. If you're a CTI person and you're very, very technical, and you think this is not what you're good at, I very much encourage you to look to get upskill yourselves in this. Because if you're an intelligence professional and you can write for the C-level, and then you can also write for the security operations or incident response, very technical, I think you're going to add a huge amount of value to your organization. Other things I also see is when a CTI team is embedded within a security operations center or within the SOC, it tends to see them almost exclusively focusing on supporting the SOC. So less support for the executives, more support for the security operations. And also from time to time, I see the intel teams having their work censored up through the ranks. So by the time a report gets to the C-level of CISO, it has been censored. Intel teams don't typically bring good news. It's typically bad news. Might make some people not look too good. But yeah, that's another common mistake that I see. And the other thing is just understanding, CTI program realities. The reality is, vast majority of CISOs have any experience involved being an intelligence customer or stakeholder. That's the problem globally. That's just because the career path to become a CISO doesn't typically give them that experience. They don't know what intelligence should like. They don't know what their deliverables should look like. They don't know what to expect from their intelligence team. This is a common thing unless they worked in government or an intelligence agency. If you look at some of the large organizations, especially in the US, a lot of the CISOs have a lot of experience in government as a result. But that's just one of the realities we have to deal with. And I always encourage CISOs to have really, really good relationships with their intelligence team. Wherever they sit in a security team, the heads of security need good and trusted relationships, and they need to provide regular feedback to their intelligence teams. One of the things I also see is, a lot of people say, oh, how actionable is this intelligence? You're giving me intelligence that's not actionable. And I would say my thing is, as an intelligence professional, my job is, as a vendor, our job is to give timely and relevant information and intelligence to an organization. Whether it's actionable or not, that's totally on the consumer of the intelligence. So the one who receives intelligence, where they can action on it. And I'll give you an example. Let's say 10 years ago, you work in your organization, 10 years ago, people's security functions were not great. Let's be honest, information security functions, extremely immature. Let's say, 10 years ago, I gave you this information that tomorrow you're going to get attacked by Chinese cyber espionage group X. They're going to spearfish your CEO. Here's all the TTPs. Here's all the indicators associated with it, and it's coming tomorrow. So this is super timely, gives you all the information, and say, okay, and they're going to try and hack the CEO's emails. What are they after? Why are they doing it? How are they going to do it? Give you all that information. Probably 10 years ago, you probably couldn't action that, right? You probably couldn't block an IP. Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. You probably couldn't search for MD5 hashes on the endpoints. So, I'm always thinking like actionability is a reflection of capability on the intelligence consumer side, not the intelligence producer side or the intelligence team side. As an intelligence team or a capability or even a vendor, we've got two metrics: timeliness, how timely can we get the intelligence to you, and how relevant is it to you? Those are the two metrics for success. That's how you should judge us as an intelligence vendor, or that's how you should judge your intelligence team internally. Just timeliness and relevance. That's it. Actionability, that's on the consumer of the intelligence. Another thing I see is, people confuse digital risk and cyber threat intelligence. I would say digital risk isn't threat intelligence. It definitely has value, but again, it's not CTI. Digital risk, there's a number of companies that operate in the digital risk space. They're looking for fake domains for your organization, fake apps in the app store, fake social media profiles. You do takedowns automated. It's basically incident response in the cloud. So, that's when I describe as somebody else's computer, just being the cloud. Super reactive, not proactive at all. Intel teams might see the output of this, or might have access to digital risk type toolings as just kind of part of the data they have access to, information they have access to. But on its own, it's not a CTI capability. I see putting the digital risk function within the threat intelligence team is probably one of the biggest ways to hamstrung an intelligence team. There's some pretty large organizations that have digital risk sit within their CTI team. I kind of see a trend as in the CTI team is not able to do real threat intelligence because they're hamstrung with responding to incidents, digital risk type incidents. Super important digital risk is moved outside of an intelligence team and doesn't sit within the intelligence team itself. So back to the intelligence cycle, we're looking at like the collection part of the intel cycle. So typical collection sources are internal systems. So what's happening, internal incidents, what samples are you getting, what's getting blocked, etc. Your telemetry internally, incidents from other organizations like you, if you're able to share within your sector, open sources, social media, blogs, news, etc. Closed sources, so closed sources being like criminal forums, criminal marketplaces, all the way up to online engagements talking to criminals. Technical sources, so VirusTotal, Polyswarm, domain tools, passive DNS, tools like that as well. I always say, understand what you've got internally before paying any external Intel vendors. Obviously, we're an external Intel vendor, Intel 471, but I don't think you should look at anybody like us until you have a good handle and a good idea of what kind of data and what information you can get internally. Get value out of that internally before you start looking externally. External Intel vendors are expensive. Document your Intel requirements. I've very much encouraged people to share your Intel requirements with any external Intel vendors when they do a POC or a proof of value, proof of concept. I think it's super important to give that so they know, what does success look like during a trial as well. So after the collection phase, you get onto the processing phase. This is where you kind of bring all your data or intelligence together in a central system or a platform. So threat intelligence platforms can help you there. So, there's a lot of commercial threat intelligence platforms. Normally, Threat Quotient, Eclectic IQ, Threat Connect, etc. Analytical tools, Multigo, and the like can help you here as well. On the tip side, there's the freebie MISP for those interested as well. But bringing it all together into a central platform is pretty important. So analysis and production, this is where a person or a team analyzes information, assesses the credibility of it, how applicable or relevant it is to your organization. That's where you kind of link it to the intelligence requirements, or that drives the priorities, what you're doing. And you want to figure out what's likely to have happened and what will likely to happen in the future. Another one of the things I see being done incorrectly is an analyst team who struggles to do analysis. There was a great report put out in the last week or two from a Dutch university talking about, how bad intelligence analysis is when it comes to cyber threat intelligence. Really good report. I'd encourage people to read that. But I see this as a massive issue. People struggling to do analysis. They're very much just factual writers. Like a newspaper or reporter. If you just write, the facts. You want an intelligence analyst to, write have some incomplete information, come up with what they think's likely happened, and what they think will likely happen in the future. Huge challenge though, across the space. Another one is just organizations outsourcing their Intel analysis. They think they can outsource it. Good luck with that. That's your path to generic analysis. We always say, what's the applicability to your organization? That's super important. Every organization would outsource their Intel analysis if it worked. There's a reason why huge numbers of organizations build and have their own intelligence analysts in-house. It's because no vendor in the world knows what's more timely and relevant to your organization than you yourself. So from that, you then disseminate intelligence to an intelligence customer, so one of those intelligence stakeholders. Based on how they consume information, they're going to get things differently. SOC would get obviously a massively technical report, maybe more technical indicators. The C-level or CISO gets a different type of report. They're not interested in the technical specifics or the technical indicators. I see it a bit where just the Intel team just has everybody and just massively sends out their intelligence to everybody. Massive mistake. That's the fastest way to make people not read your stuff. When you send an intelligence team sends something to an intelligence customer or stakeholder, it's got to be directly relevant to them and their job and what they do, so they read it. Again, feedback, super important. Reach out. What was good, what was bad, was it timely, was it relevant to their needs? What other outstanding questions do they have? Because that might push, kick off additional kind of collection and research and more future Intel products as well. Again, feedback, super important. Very, very poor across most organizations. Feedback is not great. People just read it, don't give any feedback. It's not just the intelligence team's problem. It's very much, I put it on the CISOs and other teams as well to really encourage feedback. Really will improve future deliverables, identify additional intelligence requirements that hasn't been identified. So summarizing, I believe aligning an Intel program to Intel cycle is not perfect, but it's the best thing we've got right now. I think it will help broker a shift of organizations or intelligence teams from being reactive to proactive. The idea of whole of an intelligence function is to be proactive. I mean, that's what everybody wants, intelligence-led security. People also want to identify what are the key performance indicators for their program? What does success look like or not? Implementing Intel cycle will enable that. And then inputs into the Intel cycle, like Intel vendors, were able to be assessed. You can justify renewals, justify increased budget, identify the gaps. So you need a new vendor that's going to cost X amount of money. How do you justify that? You link it to, okay, this intelligence stakeholder or customer has these requirements, and the organization has judged these to be high on the priority list, and we have a gap here, and we need to spend this amount of money, or we just accept that we can't support this customer or this stakeholder. But allowing you to document it this way really, really helps. For those interested, we've written this threat intelligence program checklist. It's on our website, threatintelprogramchecklist.pdf. For those interested, it's one pager. Super thing to kind of go through as well. Also, I blog or rant, whichever one sounds more professional at the time. I have a Medium site as well. But so thanks very much for listening. If anyone has any questions, comments, happy to hear it out. And I'll stop sharing my screen as well.
Awesome. So feel free to keep your screen up if you like, if we go back to a question, but only if it comes up. So we do have a few questions for you. And thanks a bunch for that, Mark. I thought it was really interesting. I would go on for days if I started making comments about it. So I won't. I'll leave it to the rest of the questions. But just first and foremost, a few people are asking for the link for the Dutch research university paper that you mentioned. So maybe we can chuck it in the chat later on or share it.
Yep.
And then I'll just go down one or two of the questions here, but I think I might just start off with a burning question I had actually, which was, given this talk, what actually made you start Intel 471? What was what wasn't there, or what made you actually want to do that?
Yeah, so when I was working at iSight Partners, so FireEye Threat Intelligence, FireEye sells finished intelligence products. So I was on the research or the collection side. So if you go back to that Intel cycle, I was the chief researcher, and all we did was on the Intel collection side. And so all we did was feed iSight's Intel analysts. So they didn't have none of the customers had direct access to what we were doing. It was all through the analysts. And so the genesis of Intel 471 was I started seeing like all the large organizations, especially in the US, the banks, et cetera, hiring their own Intel analysts. And once you start hiring your own Intel analysts, you don't want to have finished intelligence products, right? You want access to the raw information. I mean, the reason they're doing it, like I said in the talk, nobody knows what's more timely and relevant to your organization, but your organization yourself. Like, that's just the reality of it. And so it started with that. I was like, hey, we want to be an awesome collection capability for customers with their own analysts. So that was it. So we sold to anybody who had their own Intel analyst. And so that was the start of it. And that was the reasoning why we kind of kicked off.
Yeah, okay.
That was it. I mean, we do more now. We do Intel, we do finished intelligence and stuff. But yeah, that was the genesis of the company.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. I'll go down the list as well. We've got one from Kaif who said, what makes cyber threat programs so expensive? And is there any way we can actually make it more accessible or less expensive?
Good question. I would say the only way you can make it more cheaper if it's baked into something else. So let's say you use an MSSP or managed security service provider, and it's just baked in to that service. Because companies like us, the reality is we can't service everybody. It's just not possible. Or even any of the intelligence vendors that can't service anybody. So it has to be baked into what you do, and I think that's the only way you can make it accessible. Whether it's baked into, use an endpoint EDR tool, it's baked into that. You got red teaming talk that's happening next, it's just baked into that. So I think that's how you make it accessible. Bake it into the tooling that everybody's using, whether it's AV or your endpoint tools. I think that's how you make it accessible. So it's just kind of, you've got threat intel or threat intel capability out of the box. I think that's how you make it. Like I said, there's nothing that could be done, I think, immediately that suddenly everybody can use intelligence. I think it just has to be baked in, to different levels. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess just to the first part of his question, in terms of it being expensive, do you think that's more based on the technology you try to build around these to help with that process, or is it the human in the loop where they're sitting there and doing the actual triage and analysis and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's expensive, just because, like you said, right, the level of people, the number of people that actually can do threat intelligence and threat intelligence as well are very small. We're actually I had a discussion. We're doing a renewal with a client. We were discussing it yesterday, and they want to cap the amount of money that our renewal is on the percentage of inflation, which is like 1%. It's like, why would we agree to that?
Right.
Threat intel salaries are going up, 10% a year or around that, right? So, I think it's a human problem why it's expensive. I mean, intelligence has always been expensive, right? Like, there's billions and billions of dollars being done in US government. But I mean, tell you what else is expensive: not doing it and having a massive incident as a result, right? There's a reason why organizations are spending millions on intelligence programs. I mean, one of the large US organizations are spending, multi-millions just on external intel vendors, let alone, all the people that they have using it, all the tooling that they have. It's really expensive. One of the research I'd love to see is, first thing, for an organization, what is the percentage, and I don't know the answer to this, what is the percentage of IT security spend related to IT spend? And then what is the percentage of threat intel spend related to IT security spend? I'd love to see that, because I've not seen any, public reporting on that. I'd love to see that. And then I think people would have a better idea on, what this type of stuff costs.
New research project for anyone out there. Yeah, cool. I think that explains it pretty well. I'll keep going down. There was a question from EZ who said, what's a good book or training to get started with CTI?
I actually like, there's two training that I like. One of it is the SANS training on CTI. I like, and there's a guy who runs a small company called Treadstone 71. He runs training as well. I'd say they're, for me, the top two training that I believe on threat intelligence. So Treadstone 71, it's a one-man band, does training all over the world, and obviously, and SANS training, the threat intel course as well. I'd say they're both really, really good.
Cool. Okay, and we excuse me, I have a question from Matt Dorrington, who said, what would be the other benefits of threat intel vendors, considering timely and relevant information can only be produced by internal intel analysts? Any examples?
I would just say I would say they're not only, I wouldn't agree. I'd say external intel vendors can give you timely and relevant information if you give them what your intelligence requirements are, and they can filter it easily based on intelligence requirements. I think that's the key thing, rather than just like you can overload your internal customer, we can overload our customers with throwing them heaps of stuff, but we need to, cut it up by our intel requirements that they select, and then they get a subset of the data. So I'd say that's how you do it. That's how you get relevance. You're linking everything to intel requirements.
Cool. If you don't mind, we've still got a few more. We're
Sure.
good for time, but
Yep,
okay, cool. So we had one from Coronatine that said, what strategies and actions can be employed by the SOC, specifically threat detection with TI, to create a better relationship between these teams?
Good question. Yeah, I think I'll have to take a rain check on that, and I'll think about that one. What can they do?
Sure.
I mean, detection, I guess from an intel perspective, you could be providing, like, okay, here's this malware family or this group, here's all they work, here's their TTPs, move away from atomic indicators and more TTP-based information that a SOC can hunt for. I'm a fan of that. So technical information around TTPs, like, hey, here's this group, here's the TTPs they're working, here's how you can hunt for them for their mutex names, here's what the registry keys look like, here's a sample of the traffic. Don't worry about the IOCs, look for that. So I guess you could focus on TTPs. I mean, it's always good when an intelligence team provides TTP-based information to a SOC rather than atomic indicators, because at that point, if you have atomic indicators, you can just ingest it automatically and kind of push it to your detection systems. Hope that kind of answered the question, but I think I'd probably need a bit more time to think about it.
Cool. No, you answered or gave an answer anyway, so that's cool. Maybe flowing on to that question was another one by Jacob Norderland. He said, what's the pros and cons of threat intel companies sharing reports like APT1 or FXMSP?
I think someone's trying to poke at me a little bit with that one. I mean, I think if you look at some of especially the US government strategy and even the Australian government strategy right now, they're trying to out, certain countries, whether it's Russia or China, and some of the offensive stuff they're doing in the cyber world. What are the pros and cons of it? I mean, I guess the idea there is they want to burn the capabilities of the bad guys and inflict pain on them, so they need to make new capabilities again. The specific example you said, I mean, I was pretty clear that I think that it had an impact on law enforcement operations. I do not think anybody outing anything publicly that would impact law enforcement operations. So financially motivated cybercrime, where there's actually a potential where an arrest can happen, I don't think it helps anybody, or it helps us as the good guys to be outing that. And all you're doing is helping the bad guy, make his operational security better, remove and destroy evidence, and make it harder for law enforcement. So I think it's a double-edged sword. If it's a cyber espionage actor, the reality is it's probably not going to ever go to court. No one's ever going to be standing before trial and going to jail. At that point, you just I guess their strategy right now is outing TTPs and tooling, and also, putting a face to that to impact them. So they need to do all retooling as well. I think that's probably the strategy right now. But yeah, on the law enforcement for criminal side, I'd say I definitely don't think it's a good idea outing things if you're going to make the bad guy know that the good guys are onto him.
Interesting perspective, actually. And I guess that may also lead into another discussion I saw happening on the Slack before, and it was actually a question I'd mentioned was around tooling. So Lampire is another type of tool that's very similar in terms of visualization and tracking to, say, Maltego. From what I can gather, you guys probably use Maltego, but the question was more around, especially the recent report about Lampire potentially sending that intelligence somewhere else. Do you have a known list of sanitized tooling that you only use, or do you actually go for mixed of closed and open source tooling? Do you design your own when it comes down to that tooling aspect, if you've got any info there?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously because we're focused on financially motivated cybercrime, we don't have nation states so much trying to see what we're tracking. So I think that kind of helps. Our threat profile is criminals want to know what we're doing rather than nation states. So I think it's a bit different. But at some point you just need to accept, depending if you're an organization, you just need to accept that, people, whenever you use anything online, whether it's a Google search or Facebook friend somebody on the back end is going to know what you're doing and what you're searching. Facebook will show you targeted ads. Google will do the same thing. So you just have to kind of risk manage it as well. But yeah, I can't give you any list. I mean, majority of the tools we have are internal. I mean, you mentioned one that we use, Maltego. I mean, everybody uses Maltego pretty much. Yeah, I mean, I'd say you could count on one hand the external tooling we use, but generally we have a good idea who they are, who's behind it, the CEO, etc.
Cool. Okay. I think we might just do one more if that's cool, and then
Sure.
You'll be able to see all these questions and answer them either through the chat or later on. So I think that's cool. So the last one I had was Girish Ranad, who said, how to explain ROI on CTI investment to stakeholders.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think if you start at the stakeholder, like I said in the talk, they start at the CISO and be like, hey, we're going to help you make better decisions and give you information. Like, what are you secure? What are you doing your job for? Like, what are you securing? You're securing an organization. Okay, what are the crown jewels? What are you going to put in place based on the reality of the threat targeting you? A Bitcoin company, for example, has a different threat profile to an oil and gas company. Bitcoin company has probably got the North Koreans trying to attack them, or even massively advanced financially motivated cyber criminals going after them. So they're going to have a different threat profile and different defensive mechanisms and different investments than an oil and gas company, which is a different type of threat. So, I mean, it's hard if they don't want that help. Like the one I said about, actionability or actioning intelligence, if they just want to ignore the advice you give them. Maybe there isn't much return on investment, to be honest. I think it depends. But, how do you put a number on it? I don't know. I mean, I think it's just more, these are decisions you need to make as a CISO, and this is what we're going to try and help you with, so you understand what's happening, what the reality of what's happening around you, and the things that external things and internal things that impact you. And hopefully as a result, you make better decisions. But if you do that well for a CISO, I don't see people typically saying, okay, I don't like it anymore. If it is being done well, typically increased investment happens, not the reverse.
Yeah, cool. Okay, awesome. Well, Mark, I'm sure there'll be more questions coming in later on, but I really appreciate everything you've been able to give in your talk. A few things actually hit home for me, so really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone else. We're going to take like a 5-minute break, so feel free to go grab a drink, go to the bathroom, anything like that. And we'll be back in about 5 minutes. So thank you again, Mark, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, folks.
All right, we are back and live. So just going to give everyone a few minutes to rejoin if you're making your way back to your couch or crawling back to your chair. But coming up next, really excited to introduce both Molly and Luke. So both of them are at Accenture now, but Luke has obviously been Context, or I hope you're keeping the name. I mean, what's the deal there? Can you share any of that?
Yeah, we're going to be most likely keeping the name. It's still up in the air, so we'll see how we go.
Okay, cool. Well, in terms of the introductions, Luke, I personally see him as a bit of a mentor. He's got hundreds of years worth of knowledge absorbed in there somehow, which is cool. And it's also Molly's first ever SecTalks appearance. So a huge welcome to her, and thanks for taking your time to come on. A lot of effort goes into these presentations. So really excited to have you on here. And hope you enjoy your first talk here. And look, I'll leave it to you to go for it. So I'll go off camera, and we should be able to share screen from Molly to kick it off.
Coolio. Rightio. So I'll kick things off with a little bit of an intro. So essentially what we're trying to do here is have a talk and provide some kind of insight around threat intel-led red teaming. Is a little different to your normal penetration test or vulnerability scan, and even a red team. So we've got Molly, if you want to kind of flick over to the agenda. Cool. So we've got Molly going through what threat intel is, the sources, threat modeling, etc. We had Mark just earlier doing a fantastic presentation around what it is and some of the mistakes around threat intel programs. And we will kind of briefly recap what threat intel is, just in case someone else is actually tuning into this as a presentation in isolation. So, and then I'll be going through red teaming. I've been doing it for a little while, so I know it inside and out somewhat, what it is, and more importantly, what it isn't, how it works, specifically in the adversary emulation space. Some of the frameworks that are out there for these assessments, and more importantly, some of the lessons learned and some of the insights as part of doing these things on a monthly, weekly, yearly basis. So essentially what we're trying to achieve here is to spark a little bit of thought, a bit of a thought exercise around threat intel driven activities. It could just be red teaming, it could be everything else as well, to have, to start thinking about how threat teaming, what it means to you, and how you can actually use it as part of your day-to-day targeted assessments, right? So there's no point putting a moat around your entire house with a portcullis and all this, kind of security if you live in a gated community and there's been no history of a break-in. So trying to kind of contextualize it somewhat, to kind of use the awesome term that Mark mentioned before. Rightio, so if you want to talk about me, so a few of you may know me, a few of you may not. What I am is a pen tester. I've been into penetration testing or security and hacking stuff since, let's not go into numbers. But now I've been working at Context for a little while. I kind of started with Context back when I was living in the UK, and that was like in 2012. So I've kind of been working with the guys for a little while now. And effectively, I'm a hacker. I have been for a very long time and a very long, time of my life. And I do a lot of woodworking. So I make lots of useless crap. more recently, I kind of made a TV unit, so I posted that up on Twitter. So if you want to kind of follow me, that's cool. And some of you may know me from the B-Sides Melbourne crew, so shout out to you folks, and also my Tuscon family up in Queensland, who is definitely not locked down anymore. So congrats to you guys, I suppose. And, you know, just the photo that I kind of chose was a photo from about a year ago. So I was doing COVID mask before it was cool, just saying. Molly?
Cool, thank you for that. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. And hello to everyone. So it is my first time at SecTalks, so thank you for having me. My name's Molly Day, so I work at Accenture as the ANZ Threat Intel lead, and I have a background in law enforcement and anti-corruption, specifically in intelligence. So I don't do any woodwork, but I am a lover of various sport, but a master of none. So I'm going to basically be talking to you today about threat intel and threat intel-driven red teaming. So we'll do a quick recap. I don't think I've ever seen two talks that have flowed more perfectly together than Mark's talk before this. So that was a fantastic segue. So we'll do a quick recap of intel, basically just starting off with a quick definition. So intelligence is the collection, analysis and dissemination of evidence-based knowledge on foreign and domestic threats and adversaries. And Mark did cover this already. So on the right-hand side there, you can see our intel cycle. Essentially, it's a 5-stage cycle. So you start with your planning and direction. So that's understanding your intel collection requirements. You actually go and do your collection from a range of sources, the analysis, the dissemination to your stakeholders, and then feedback. So the important definition here is that there is a big difference between information and intelligence. So until you actually analyze the information or data you've collected, the output is not intelligence until you've conducted that analysis. All right, so some intel sources. There are hundreds of thousands of different sources. Here are a few of the different categories. Most people will have heard of OSINT before, so that's open source intelligence, things that are publicly available on the internet. Human intelligence is interacting directly with humans, so you'll see that more when it comes to law enforcement. Signals intelligence, that's again more sort of law enforcement and government related. Paid IOC feeds, which is what Mark touched on. And then we've got client-derived data. So that's information from your own internal environment. ISACs and industry peers. So ISACs are those intel sharing communities that exist for different industries. So there is one for financial services, one for oil and gas, and they are great bodies to share among those particular organisations. And the last one, which is typically most people's favourite to talk about, is closed source, so darknet forums and marketplaces. So on that, I'm just going to touch on something that we hear a lot across our industry, and that is that we hear often this propagation of, 95% of data is found on the dark web. So I hope you can get my message by the big red cross. It's absolutely not true. Yes, there is information that is relevant in those forums and marketplaces. Would I say that it's 95% of the data that we're collecting? Absolutely not. So I just wanted to put this out there as a bit of a myth buster that no, I wouldn't say that there is that much data down there. Okie doke. Now, IOC feeds, this is what we were talking about earlier. So this is essentially, it's a blacklist, really. It's a list of things like URLs, domains, file hashes, and IP addresses that are pumped into an organization to help them basically block those indicators. Now, that alone is not just threat intelligence. It is basically what I said earlier, a blacklist. So we've got intelligence, and it is not just an IOC feed. If you're running a mature intel operation, essentially it should be feeding into a range of different business functions. So I've got this wheel over on the right-hand side. It is not exhaustive, but they are a range of different teams and stakeholders that ideally, if you are running a really mature organization or threat intel capability, you should be pumping intel into those areas. So intel is typically delivered at 3 different levels, and that is strategic, operational, and tactical. So strategic is your C-level, your leadership. Operational is kind of that mid-tier, and then tactical is your SOC and your technical teams. So you can see that we've got SOC operations should be always receiving the technical data, vulnerability management. Intel can always feed into that, letting them know which vulnerabilities are being exploited in the wild. That's always helpful when it comes to patch management. It can feed into budget and resourcing, leadership and executives, which Mark did touch on. So basically making sure that they're aware of what's going on in the industry, who are other peers that are being hit, what's been the consequence, who was it, are we prepared for that same scenario? Red teaming, which we're going to come back to, threat hunting activities should always be driven by Intel. Your third-party management, so understanding who it is that you're dealing with. We see it so often where it's a third party that is responsible for a data breach, and then the main organisation is also destroyed or has their name tarnished as a result. And then always risk management. So the reason we're here today is to talk about red teaming. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Now I've got this here. You can see my Photoshop skills. Basically what I'm trying to show here is two worlds colliding. So you've got on one side, essentially it's your blue team capability or your Intel capability. And then on the right-hand side, you've got Lucas. So he's obviously representing our offensive capability or the red team. Okie doke. So this is essentially the cyber kill chain. So what we're depicting here is that when you are doing a red team, it shouldn't just be made up of these random scenarios that someone's chosen. They should be based off intelligence. So what I've added in at the start here is your attack scenario modeling. And essentially what that is, that's where you have your intelligence team go out and understand the organization's threat landscape. Who are their most likely threat actors? What are the most likely scenarios that they're going to face? And then that data is passed on to the client organization and also the red team so that they can then emulate those threat actors, and we can test the organization's capability to detect and respond to that. So what is attack scenario modeling? And it is what I've just touched on. So identifying your primary targets of the organization and how they operate. So that's really important. So how they operate, essentially their tactics, techniques, and procedures, their TTPs. We want to understand what tools they're using, how they go about hacking other organizations so that we can make it look like it is that threat actor when we're hacking the client organization. The second one is understanding your most likely and most dangerous use cases, and then providing detailed and realistic attack scenarios. So that's something we see across the industry quite a lot, is where you have these random scenarios that are kind of plucked out of the sky and it's called a red team. But that doesn't actually really derive a whole lot of value for the client. It's just, it's an exercise, an offensive exercise. And the purpose is to measure the client's readiness to detect, respond, and recover from a real adversary. I should have put real in quotes, as close to real as possible, and to determine possible attack paths which may be exploited in the future. Okie doke. So using attack scenario modeling, these are some of the considerations when you're doing the Intel side of the attack scenario modeling. So TTPs you want to be including in your reports. So that is understanding how the threat actor behaves, listing out any custom or open source tooling that they're using, known and zero-day and end-day exploits, geopolitical considerations. This is something that often gets left out. We can see this a lot at the moment with different countries sort of escalating between each other. That is always an important factor when it comes to attack scenario modeling. And also the motivation. So looking at the organization and understanding who is it? Is it a cyber espionage group that's most likely to target them? Is it a financially motivated threat actor? Is it hacktivism, or is it something more disruptive? So these are the different sorts of angles that you want to be considering when you're putting together that attack scenario model. Okie doke, so mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Some of you may have seen this before. Essentially, this is a really good tool to understand how threat actors behave and to map to this framework. Now, they've actually just released an updated version, which is the one you can see on screen here. And this has sub-techniques. So it goes into more detail. If you do go onto the website and double click on some of these techniques, it gives you even more of a breakdown. So giving this sort of data, what we do is we map a threat actor to this framework and then pass that along to the red team with a far more in-depth report that basically details line by line exactly how that threat actor is behaving. And you want to best prepare the red team to make sure that they can emulate that threat actor as closely as possible. Another really important thing when you are doing this is making sure that it's not two sort of separate engagements that are going on. You want to be making sure that if there's a change to the threat actor's behavior throughout the red team, that you're feeding that into the red team so that they can emulate that. And Lucas has a really good story about this. I'll let him tell you after I hand over to him. This next slide that I'm showing here is essentially, I've just picked a random APT group, so APT 41. For those of you who don't know, APT is Advanced Persistent Threat. And if we map their TTPs to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you can see lit up in blue. These are the different tactics, techniques, and procedures that they're known to use. So that's the sort of data that we're going to be passing on to the red team. Okie doke. With that, I will pass over to Lucas.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'll do a brief overview of what red teaming is and go into a little bit of what it's not. So there's a really good presentation that Troy Defty did. He's a good friend of mine based in Australia. So I think he did it at AcerCon or CyberCon last year, and you can find it on the interwebs. So use your intelligence gathering techniques to find the relevant the sites. So what I want to do here is highlight the point that I think there's some genuine confusion around what a red team is, and I've seen some vendors calling it a vulnerability assessment, essentially potentially running a Nessus scanner and just saying this is a red team exercise because well it's done by the red team, right? So although this sort of exercise is actually massively underselling what we're trying to achieve here as actual adversary or actual red teamers trying to emulate a adversary, and I think it's doing a massive disservice to the entire industry as well as, more importantly, the customer as well. So penetration testing, we should all pretty much know what that is, but just to kind of highlight any kind of issues or definitions that might be a little bit askew, it's effectively testing something. So in the grand scheme of things, I always see penetration testing as part of like the larger red teaming, vulnerability scanning, and all those kind of scenarios as almost like a unit test, right? So you might have a mobile application which is part of a larger ecosystem of APIs, of web services, of backend, of AWS, of Azure, or whatever it might be, and effectively you're testing that in isolation, effectively in its own isolation, done, right? And then you move into things like scenario-based assessments. So I don't really hear too much talked around the scenario-based assessments. At Context, we do use scenario-based assessments as a point of terminology, and I have seen some other vendors do the same. So it's exactly how it sounds. It's a specific type of scenario executed at a point in time. So think about it. You might have a malicious insider has compromised the web server, right? What can they do? Right, we've had certain customers and that we've dealt with in the past where they've had their web servers, their web application tested on a yearly and a quarterly basis, and it just seems like it's just a cycle, this endless cycle of like, all right, like show us why we're doing this, and then we kind of pitch to them saying, well, how about if we do a scenario-based assessment? What happens if a 0-day comes out and someone on the internet gains access to the underlying server? What's the worst thing for you? Maybe worth kind of hashing that one out. Or what could happen if someone found our AWS keys, for example? There might be a specific scenario. You get the point. It's a specific scenario. It's not a trophy sort of thing. It's not an end goal. It's a scenario that you want to play out. And moving into things like red teaming, simulated attack, and emulated attack, and simulation of adversaries, this is where we kind of get a little bit into semantics. So red teaming is very similar to a simulated attack or emulation, but they are slightly different. A red team is a little bit more broader in scope, and the aim is to simulate how an actual attacker or external attacker may target a production service, while the blue team doesn't know about the activity. An emulation is exactly that, where it aims to emulate how an adversary operates, and it's very different to a simulation as well. So following the same tactics, techniques and procedures with a specific object in mind, right? So if we kind of take that example before around the APT, it was up on the slide before, we'll go through and emulate, almost down to the point of every single thing that threat actor might do in order to upskill the blue team. So it's a lot. I get it, and the threat intel side of it is a little bit more structured and follows a stricter methodology and approach, which we'll kind of get into in a sec. So I know it's a lot. It's kind of trying to work out all these terminologies, and we can always come up with weird and wonderful things. How to emulate how to emulate an adversary, how to simulate it. However, I think the main point is that we don't know how, where, when, and most importantly, why. So this is where we kind of move into some of the motivations, which I think is very key. So when you move into the motivations behind a red team scenario, it kind of maybe falls into 4 categories. There might be more, but quite typically from my experience is kind of fall into these. You'll have the head of security, head of IT, IT manager, maybe a CISO if the organization's large enough to support it. And they'll typically want to satisfy one of 2 categories. It's either justify more spend, and that's usually through like a shock and awe approach. And what we've seen in the past that they'll say, hey, we want you to break in physically from the street. And the reality is not a lot of threat actors are breaking in physically, especially not now, because they're probably worried about coronavirus as well. Or they might be trying to uplift their defensive capability, right? So, and that kind of splits it into 2 subsections. They've either spent a lot of money outsourcing their defensive capability or their monitoring and alerting capability to a third party, and they want to kind of justify why they're spending, or they might be going into a cycle where they're trying to renegotiate. So they might, ask a offensive security company to kind of come in and show that the vendor's not doing their job. And we have had red teams in the past where, the response, and one was quite recent, the response was in 12 minutes. They were able to triage and isolate the host that were compromised in 12 minutes, which is like absolutely ridiculous, right? And then we've had, on the flip side, we've had 6, 7, 8 hours, right? So it's everything between, and that's what they might want to test out. Or they've just created a whole internal function and they want to start uplifting their capability. And that's where I personally feel a lot of value out of these types of engagements is actually working with that blue team. And you move into the sales side. Obviously, it's sales driven and revenue. But some of the sales guys might actually legitimately want to talk about cool work. So they want to talk to the client saying, yeah, we can break into this, we can do this, we can social engineer, we can compromise your AWS keys from external if we kind of reverse engineer your mobile application or something like that. And then you got the pen testers. So largely they're driven by a technical challenge, really. They want to hack cool stuff and they want to do cool things, which is great. However, a financially motivated threat actor doesn't want to do cool stuff. They just want to make lots of money, which is fundamentally pulling in opposite directions. And then finally, you have a regulator, which is some of the things I'm going to go through here, and they're driven by a compliance requirement. So a lot of these organizations that we target in these types of emulated attack or intel, especially the intel-driven ones where it's regulator-driven, especially targeting financial institutions. Financial institutions serve a critical economic function, right? So you can just picture if some of the big banks around the world went under, that would cause absolute turmoil, potentially even worse than what we've seen this year so far. And more importantly, how they map against the industry peers. So certain banks serve a critical economic function where they might have the largest ATM fleet. They might have the largest foreign exchange, or they might have there might be trading in securities or something like that. And those are the kind of things that are largely driven by the regulator. But more importantly, they want to map them against their peers and see how us as a country or, Southeast Asia, UK, maybe US, how they're tracking compared to everyone else. And then like push the banks to kind of uplift their capability in order to respond. So the types of scenarios that might come up is, the CISO, the head of, is largely driven by an agenda. There's always an agenda saying, I want to justify more spend, or I want to test this this capability. Sales is largely revenue-driven, pen testers curiosity-driven, and the regulators governance and function-driven. Right, so I'm going to probably say a little bit of a controversial statement here, and this one's aimed at a lot of the red teamers out there and pen testers especially as well. The red team effectively exists, in my mind, to fundamentally uplift the blue team, right? And I know we can maybe go into a lengthy debate around the semantics of it and the back and forth, but fundamentally that's the purpose that we all serve, is to uplift the capability for an organization to actually respond to an active attack. And if we do our job properly, simulate or emulate or whatever it might be, and have that customer ready to respond to an actual attack because we've tested them, we've put them through their paces. And one of my colleagues likes to always call it a sparring partner, right? We're their sparring partner. So effectively, that is it. That is true. And you know, we can debate to we're blue in the face, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So moving on, there are some frameworks around the world. So CBEST, I was fortunate enough to be around when the CBEST scheme was coming into the UK. I was working at Context in the UK, and there was a whole bunch of talk around what this framework was going to look like. And it's effectively, you know, using threat intelligence to drive a lot of their testing activity, and they kind of map it to TTPs and all these kind of, well, before TTPs were really a thing, they map it to how they might go about their ways. And now, so that started in 2013, and now they've gone through, you know, iterations and feedback and pilot programs and whatnot. And now they're sitting at version 2, which is, you know, really, really good. Then we've had ICAST as well pop up in Hong Kong. And there are 3 main components around that, testing effectively the cyber, sorry, Mark, the cyber resilience, and the cyber intelligence sharing platform, and then the professional development platform that they have as well. There's TIBA in the EU, and that's split across many countries like France, Netherlands, I think Germany as well, and a lot of the other countries around there as well, because, you know, the EU has their own drivers. Specifically, the European Central Bank has their own drivers as well. AASE or ASI is a Singaporean-based kind of framework, and that started around 2018 or so, and that's in version 1, and they're still kind of working through the paces and kind of finding their feet. But effectively what we're seeing is a lot of these frameworks popping up around the world, right? So all these frameworks essentially have one thing in common: that's working with a regulator and a threat intelligence provider and a red team provider in one kind of unison to identify, firstly, the critical economic function that financial services client serves for the region, and then how to test it, or what likely threats are targeting it, and how they're targeting them, when and how, and what their motivations might be, and then moving through to actually testing it, and then uplifting the responsive capability, which is first and foremost one of the priorities. So some frameworks in this whole model are stricter than others. You know, some of them might be a little bit more regulated, others maybe a little bit looser because they're a little bit newer, but the main objective is for them to test that critical economic function for that local economy. Right, so I'll kind of briefly go through the execution flow of a intelligence-driven red team. Effectively, what happens is there's a initiation phase, right? Someone has to pay for it, and that might be the regulator is driving the activity. That might be the CISO wants to justify their spend or justify more budget, or it might be on the back of potentially an incident, and they want to test their ability to respond to that incident again, or a different one if that was the case. And then obviously there's the motivations that we kind of discussed earlier, and it's usually going up to their big boss or the CFO and saying, you know, can we please have some money, thanks, because they're not cheap. Just like threat intel, it's, you know, red teaming is not cheap. Usually, you know, they kind of last anywhere between, you know, some of the frameworks dictate the 90 to up to 120 days worth of testing, and that costs a bit of money. Right, and then we move into the threat intel side of it. Molly and Mark did a fantastic job describing what it is, so I'm just going to make a meal out of it if I described it. But yeah, effectively, it's who can do what, where, and why. So on the output side of it, they produce those scenarios, such as the organized crime. Organized criminal organizations are likely to target using these techniques and through these means, right? So that might be either internet facing or there might be physical. Again, probably not much physical kind of attacks happening these days because COVID. But they're likely to target in these locations, and these are their motivations. It might be money if it's criminal, like what Mark was saying. It might be intellectual property if it's a nation state. And there's all sorts of scenarios that can come out as a result. But fundamentally, what you want to do is usually funnel them into a few scenarios. And it might be, as part of the engagement, there might be 2, 3, 4 types of unique scenarios where they might be trying to map certain threat actors and how they operate. But what happens at the end is that they all funnel through very, very similar TTPs. So when you have that funneling action, effectively what happens there is they can scale out. So you only have to test how the organization responds to or has detection capability around extracting passwords from memory, right? There's Mimikatz, then there's probably like a few other tools that still work these days. So they're all going to use the same kind of attacks. They're always going to use the same kind of tools, but how they go about it on the front end may be a little bit different. And then finally, a test plan comes out, and that describes what the red team does, how they execute it, and it's not really meant to be a step-by-step guide saying like a cookbook. There is a lot of leeway to kind of map real adversaries, and also how they might, because adversaries like red teamers would adapt to the scenario they're seeing, right? Saying, well, our only TTP is to punch through the firewall and execute this. Oh, they have a firewall. Okay, well, we're done. So there's no point moving on, right? So that's not going to happen. They'll adapt and try and find something else. Rightio. So, and the next phase is around the preparation. So, out of that comes a red team test plan, and that's fed in through the intel side of it. Red teamers work with the threat intel team and then with the regulator, develop a test plan and say, here's the things we're likely to execute. It's like an architect giving the plans to a builder saying, yeah, that's great, but it doesn't work in reality because of these things or whatever, right? And there's a bit of a negotiation there sometimes. The scenarios are discussed, what's likely, what's not, within the time frame. So if they only have a certain amount of days allocated to it, based on experience, usually it takes them X amounts and they want X plus 10 or X plus 20 worth of amount, and that's a discussion we have. And then more importantly is the risk management. So here's where the Intel-led red team specifically around some of these frameworks really comes into its own, is around specifically risk management. So you have to manage risk, right? You can't just blindly run MSO8067 on a core production server. So if one of the scenarios is to denial of service all of their workstations when the fleet, obviously you don't want to do that. So then you say, okay, well, how can we manage the risk? Maybe we put a laptop specifically in a portion of the network which we DOS and cause some kind of outage. And you kind of want to manage that risk. And there's a series of levels and a series of things you have to go through. So one of the takeaways, which we'll kind of go through later, is kind of ensuring that the vendor has actually considered that. Otherwise, they're probably just, in cowboy boots and spurs. And a communications plan, right? So there's a clear communications plan. Who's the escalation point? Who do you talk to? When do you talk to them? Who are the key stakeholders that are associated with this entire engagement? Who's inside the little secure enclave of communication? Because you don't want everyone to know. You potentially want certain people to know, like the asset owners, saying, hey, just FYI, we're performing potentially a risky activity as part of this framework. Something may go down. If it does, let us know, and we can ensure that it's not the activity that's going on, and go from there. Right, and then you kind of move into the hacking stuff, right? And this is the most fun, and all the documentation and risk management reports and project plans and all that stuff like that. That's not fun unless you're me. You're doing spreadsheets all day most of these days. So kind of to map it back into the APT 41 that Molly had before, This is effectively something that we would see from a threat intel report saying, okay, well, here's all the TTPs we're trying to hit because this is how the threat actor is likely to target them. And there's a little bit of leniency around it saying, well, something like a BITS job gets detected by a lot of endpoint detection and response tools. It gets detected by a lot of other defensive tools, so that might not work. However, the new BITS admin is this, or this is the new technique, or that's the new technique. And Marta's doing an awesome job at kind of keeping up with these things. So it's hands down one of the best projects we've seen in a while. So so that's effectively what we see, and we develop a testing plan based on that. And it might be 3-4 scenarios. And there's a few frameworks in how we actually execute the red team, right? You got your Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, which has gone through before. This one's the unified kill chain, and then various vendors like we have our own kind of homegrown kind of assessment kill chains that we kind of say and we go through. But the unified kill chain is probably one of the closest ones that represent the whole thing, and that goes through the whole series of reconnaissance, external kind of footprinting, weaponization, creating stuff like creating exploits, creating rats, or delivery, how you're going to deliver it, social engineering, and I kind of mentioned that physical is a highly unlikely vector, but social engineering as a whole isn't, right? So social engineering, I still encompass, voice phishing or vishing, smishing, which I haven't really done too much, but things like targeted phishing, right? Spear phishing, and that's 110% heavily used across the world, right? I'm still getting emails from people that want me to, subscribe to their wares, or from Microsoft, which might give me a call. And I really wish they would stop reaching out to give me a call around supporting me with some tech support. But it's not really Microsoft, it's some scammers based out of somewhere. And what they're trying to do is infiltrate my computer. And if you want a really, really good laugh, jump on YouTube and just say, scammers are getting owned or something like that. It's actually really funny, of like the hackback stuff. I don't condone it. However, it's kind of funny. And then we'll kind of move into the exploitation. So things like privileges, things like exploiting vulnerabilities, exploiting weaknesses, trust permissions, all that kind of stuff. And then persistence. Obviously, you don't want to go through all that hassle of creating C2 infrastructure, creating a phishing campaign. You're watching the logs so closely, and then finally someone clicks and you're like, I got it. But then there's no persistence as part of that as well. And then there's a lot these days, especially around defensive evasion. And I would say being a red teamer is getting harder and harder, which is a good thing, because that means that blue team, which we're effectively working for, is really upping their game. So that's a really, really good thing to see. And then you have command and control. How do you kind of, talk to your rats and stuff like that? And then it kind of goes through, I won't really go through a lot of the nitty and gritty of these ones, but you're inside the network, you want to move around. What do I have? I've done this privilege escalation training and also presentations like who am I, what am I, and what do I have access to in order to kind of serve your means. And then finally, there's the action on objectives, right? So there's your target, there's the scenarios, there's the things that you're trying to mimic, and that could be collection of certain artifacts. So if you're targeting intellectual property because you're trying to mimic a certain threat actor, then you'll be targeting that. You'll collect that intellectual property and exfiltrate it via the next means. Or there's manipulation or other things going on as well. Right. And this is hands down should be everyone's favorite part, is the report, right? And I'm probably going to get flamed in the comments now, but I would argue that that's probably one of the most important parts as well, because, and I say this to the team all the time, you can do all these whiz-bang things, you can develop 0-day, you can, work through the night, and, some of the team have, this year already, and you can do all these awesome things, but if the customer doesn't see it on a piece of paper, it's like, all right, cool, I saw a report for the 10 pages and you did some cool stuff, but what's that mean to me, right? So that's where we really, really kind of, there's like that the weight in the report is worth it, sort of thing, and not to kind of add more screenshots than you need to, but it's very important. And then there's a closeout. So the debrief, right? So that's where You expect the vendor to come in potentially along with the TI provider and have a conversation around what worked, what didn't, what were the pain points, lessons learned, and that's why we're seeing CBEST go through those iterations as well of like now it's at version 2 because I had the debrief sessions and they've worked with the regulator as well around what worked, what didn't, what was a pain point, and there's so many lessons learned coming out of these things since 2013. It's amazing, and that's why the iteration of these is so important. There are certain other frameworks around, and this kind of leads me to talk around the necessity locally here. So we have TBEST, which is UK again, which is mainly centered around telecommunications sector, which is critical infrastructure. You've got GBEST, targeting the government. I would consider that also critical infrastructure. If the government goes down, what happens, right? Especially now where we're so reliant on the government to kind of give us that information that we need to operate, right? And then there's Attest and Assure, which kind of, it's more of an audity kind of thing, but it's a specific framework around the aviation sector. And this kind of leads me to a little bit of a ranty point around, we do need this in Australia. And this is something that I think drives a lot of added value to the clients, the Australian economy, the critical infrastructure that we're all trying to support. We're all in this together, right? We're all in cybersecurity, and we're all trying to do the best thing that we can in order to uplift our defenses, right? The last thing we want is our banks to go down. The last thing we want is my power to go off halfway through a presentation, right? So I'm reliant on it. The last thing I want is my NBN. Otherwise, how am I going to stream Netflix, right? So it's very, very important stuff. And we do need to have these kind of frameworks coming in and, kind of targeting all those critical national infrastructure and the economic infrastructure as well that we have. Right, so kind of I'll kick it back over to Molly to talk through some of the insights around the threat intel team. So we'll kind of get Molly up on stage. Sorry to kind of put you on the spot there, Hoodie.
Hi. Perfect. Oh, hang on, we're still on your screen. Let me go back to the presentation. There we go. Okay, so some insights is essentially when it comes to the intel side of red teaming, you want to be getting the basics right by understanding your threat landscape. So that is, understanding who are the key threat actors. You're not out there trying to target absolutely everybody and making sure that you're ready for every single attack, because you need to prepare for your most likely scenarios first. Working with the technical teams in understanding and preparing for your most likely and most dangerous scenarios. So having that ongoing communication, making sure you're feeding intel into the right people and making sure that they're prepared. So it might not necessarily be your job to build things like detection rules in a SOC, for example, but you can help them understand what are the key threats, what happened last night, what are the other organizations that are being hit. Monitor for any of those sorts of updates, so the TTPs, any other recent attacks in your geography, and building the sorts of relationships as well with things like here in Australia, we've got the ACSC who shares intel sometimes, but there's all sorts of other industry bodies and agencies that you can build those relationships with. And collaborating with your offensive security capabilities. So whether that's internal or external, but like Lucas said, the red team should uplift the blue. So building that really strong relationship is ultimately going to make your organization more secure if you are sharing that intel. There's always kind of the age-old dilemma of, need to know intel or need to share. So it's very much shifting to the need to share basis rather than need to know, where they used to keep everything really secret. So they are my insights. I'll pass back over to you, Lucas.
Cool, and thanks for, especially around the collaboration. So what Molly kind of mentioned earlier as well is around a story that we had recently, and the threat intel changed halfway through the engagement. And this specific organization was operating in a region where the threat intel was saying that this attack is likely to happen, and this is how it's going to happen. And then we kind of, the rubber was hitting the road, and all of a sudden that organization pulled out of that specific region and saying, well, there's no real threat because we're not operating there anymore. We don't have a presence, right? That threat actor might attack us, back in our home country. However, they might not attack us, there. So, and then we kind of had to really adapt really quickly to say, well, okay, well, let's kind of revisit the threat intel. What's the most likely scenario now, and kind of work that. And that's where I think it really works well around having that collaborative effort around the threat intel and then also the red team. But some insights into some of the things that we have done is around preparation, like around just going through the phases, right? So around the preparation, so you need to keep on top. Like as red teamers, you do need to keep on top of the threat intel and the breach reports. You need to know what vectors and what attack types and all those kind of things that the adversaries are using, and also potentially your fellow colleagues, right? There's 0 day found every single day. If you follow Silvio, he's always coming up with weird and wonderful things. That's fantastic. So you kind of follow people like that and saying, okay, what's he doing, and how's that going to feed into some of the things that I want to emulate. Then around preparation, there are milestones. So throughout the entire process, there's the specific checkpoints. So you'd be moving from something like reconnaissance through to attack delivery, and then through to weaponization. And part of the attack delivery might be creating a phishing website, and then trying to phish a lot of the executives, or phish the marketing team, or phish the finance department, or phish whoever is the specific target and viable vector that the threat intel kind of came out as saying that they're most likely to be hit. And if the defensive capability is actually really good, which I have seen in the past, like we've had engagements where it was very difficult from the outside to get in because, like I said, 12-minute response time into triage and effectively knock that workstation off the network, which is absolutely incredible. You can't do anything within that time frame, especially not when you're trying to you're waiting for that connect back, right? So there are milestones, and just be prepared for them, because it does require some forward planning when you're kind of moving from one phase to the other, and say, you know what, there's no point us banging our head against the wall in this situation. So just engineer us the access, or give us a bit of concession, and just let us move on to kind of test your defense in depth. Identify key stakeholders, right? So as a red teamer, you need to know who you need to go to in order to get stuff done, right? Usually it's very, very good to have senior stakeholder buy-in. If you're working with a large organization, CEO, CIO, CISO, those kind of stakeholders are absolutely imperative for you to get stuff done. Otherwise, you're twiddling your thumbs, waiting for a change request to go through, maybe 2 weeks, and it gets knocked back, and you have to wait another 2 weeks, and you're just sitting on a bench, and you're burning that rat that you have a connect back from. And you can draw on the attack plan and a TI report to kind of feed that conversation piece you want to have as well. So, and then there's around communication, right? To be honest, it's not a chance when you have like the check-in meetings with the clients. It's not a chance for you to show off how awesome you are, how smart you are, what you've done. Like really understand like what's the actual benefit to them. Like they want to consume this. They want to uplift their capability if that was their motivator. So give them everything in order to uplift their capability. And like I said, it helps if you have a contact within the client that knows everyone. We're quite fortunate that one of the contacts we had in a recent engagement, the person there was working there for a significant period of time, and the person just knew everyone. So it said, oh, you need access to this type of service or that kind of server or this or that. Yeah, that's Joe. Joe's your go-to person, or that person. And then you got in-flight. So you got threat intel isn't a turn-by-turn navigation, like I said before. It's a guide. Right? It's not at this point you prevest using this vector, using juicy potato or hot potato, whatever it might be. It's my dog going off in the background. Great, thank you. And then you have large organizations that the thing you really have to realize is that they don't move at the same rate as a red team. When you're on a red team, you get that foothold, you get that connect back, you're pretty much up until 6 a.m. because you don't want to lose it, right? And organizations don't move that fast. There are certain risk decisions that have to be made. You just need to be patient. And sometimes factor in some dead time. There might be, like we've had one red team where there was an actual incident going on, which, it wasn't the pen testers, right? What a surprise. And it wasn't us. That was a result. So we ceased all activity straight away. There was a clear communication channel to the lead. And it's like, all right, we're ceasing. How can we help? How can we turn this thing around and help? And that's what should happen as well. And after, oh, please just clean up after yourself. I've seen certain networks that legitimately still have remote access Trojans embedded in some of their key web servers because someone found a command execution via file upload. So please clean up after yourself. If you can't clean up after yourself, that's fine. Take a note of it, which moves me into my next point. Keep good notes, take screenshots of absolutely everything. What I would probably recommend is also kind of going through and just script up a screenshot. You might be watching YouTube, you might be watching Netflix or whatever while you're waiting for a connect back. That's fine. You can take all that stuff out. But the main point is you screenshot everything. And if you take good notes, you know where everything is, and you can go back and clean it up. If not, you can let the stakeholder know, saying, hey, on that box, I uploaded something or I ran an exploit, it failed. I don't know the state of it. You might want to have a look and triage it. And then insights for clients, decision makers, and stakeholders or key stakeholders. The pre-assessment, I think fundamentally you should be asking very pointy questions of the provider and determine how they attack certain scenarios, or the threat intel provider, ask them what they go through in order to kind of generate these scenarios, or where their feeds come from, all these things to kind of, identify what they do, how they do it, so you have a level of comfort with their ability to not DOS your network effectively, right? Or do something else very silly. And this might also kind of feed into the whole TI-driven activity, right? It's not just TI-driven red teaming. It might be TI-driven pen testing, saying, you know what, our website's absolutely fine, but however, we're seeing the bad guys on the internet doing this kind of activity based on TI. So that might drive your spend accordingly as well. And Mark kind of touched on that as well. And I agree. You should be at a level of maturity where you kind of start looking at these things as well. Preparation, OPSEC, it's so important. And identify when you need a concession, when do you need that engineered access, right? Because it will stand out if you don't kind of go around some of these things appropriately. Stakeholders, first and second tier. So you have this little tier of this little fold of people that are in the know. It might be the CEO, CIO, CISO, the head of security. And potentially maybe throw one of the blue team leads into it, just to kind of get them into the fold. Because I'll kind of go into my final point there, but you want to get them on board as a stakeholder. During communication is key. Open, honest communication. Like if something happened and it's like, oh well, that might have been me, call it out. Because the last thing you want to do is a week later find out though that severity 1 or that P1 incident was actually you, and hence it rattles the cages up high for that CFO that initially signed off this activity for the funding, and that CEO said, yep, let's go ahead with it. They might turn around and say, actually, this is not for us, this is too risky. But if it goes absolutely swimmingly because you have adequate and honest communication, then likely to do it again. And flexibility, be flexible. There is usually some flexibility in the schedule, in the client, in what you're trying to achieve, and also just work with the vendor around what they're trying to achieve as well. Just have that open and honest communication. They're adults, you're an adult, let's just all be adults. And then after, bring all the stakeholders into the fold. There's been instances where, it's the blue team versus red team, and I cannot categorically say this enough and kind of scream it from the rooftops that it's not us versus them. We see a lot of red team versus blue team kind of things. It's not an us versus them, and it really, really shouldn't be. And this is not something we should be doing moving forward, because it's a little bit corrosive to what we're actually trying to achieve as a whole, right? So bring them into the fold, get them into the activity, and get all the technical people involved, get all the senior stakeholders involved, put on some beer, pizza, whatever you need to do, whatever kind of gets that creative juices flowing, gets kind of the dialogue moving. What you did, how you did it, where you did it, what they saw, what you did, all that stuff. And you kind of, and as red teamers, that kind of, you want to feed off that, because that kind of gives you an indication of what you want to do next as well. So I kind of move on to the final slide around some further readings and resources. So Crest They have CSAM and CSAS certifications, which are specifically targeted towards these types of activities. You got CBEST, you got ICAS, you got ASSI, you got STAR, you got STAR-FS now, you got the TIBA frameworks. Have a read through them, get a gauge of what they do and how they do it. SANS, SEC 564 course, where introduction and planning to red team exercise is a really good entry point into this thing. I'm not associated with SANS or anything like that. I've just done a course, and it's actually pretty good. Brendan Jameson did a really cool talk at KiwiCon a while back, talking about red cells, specifically mimicking threat actors for realistic responses. I couldn't find his slides, but he's around the infosec scene in Australia, so maybe he's willing to share. But Zorcat did a really good breakdown on one of his blogs to say, hey, this is what he was talking about. And Troy Defty, again, really good talk about red teaming, what it is, what it isn't, and background and whatnot, and how to move forward from it. With that, we'll move on to the question slide. We should say questions there. So there's no questions, so that's it. No, I think there might be questions.
Cool. Hoodie's adding me in now. And maybe Molly, you want to pop back on as well. So we've got a few here. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. And the two of you made it really seamless, to be honest. I didn't see any hiccups or anything. That was really cool. And there's a really important question that came through too, which was, what is the name of both of your dogs?
Oh, my one's Brendy. She's 14. And she's slowing down her age, but you heard her barking before, so she's awake at the moment. It's great.
Mine is actually my best friend's dog. His name is Henry, and he's 1. He was a little bit younger in that photo, but he's 1 now.
Wow, big dog. Crazy. Okay, well, that important question out of the way. So for everyone else, a little bit later, we'll just go through the prizes and stuff. So stick around just till we finish the questions, and we'll go through some stats and interesting stuff that we've come to. But for now, I'll start on some of the questions. So one of them is for Molly, and it says, with the availability of enterprise threat intel feeds such as Anomaly, ThreatStream, Palo Alto, FireEye, all that kind of thing, when would an organization actually need to hire a threat intel specialist?
Yeah, good question. So I think with that one, it depends on the size of the organization and kind of the maturity of the security team. So, if you're running quite a small organization, it's a bit of a wild thing to just go out and have a threat intel person. But, if you're a reasonably sized organization, you've got a developing security team, and say that from those vendors, you're just getting IOC feeds and you're not getting anything else, then it's a good idea to have somebody out searching for other, more relevant intel, I guess, not just the IoT feeds, and then making sure that they're feeding that out to the different stakeholders.
Cool. Okay. And the next question is for actually Luke. It was mentioned. So, do red team vendors have dedicated CTI analysts?
Yes, some do, depending on the organization size. There are vendors around the globe, and I'm trying to stay within the ethos of SecTalks around not a vendor pitch, right? So there are certain organizations around the globe that have a significant size and can support an internal threat intelligence team.
Cool. Okay. And back to Molly. Andrew said, and not sure if it'd be covered, but if some of the marketplaces, I assume he's talking about some of the closed forums or things like that, are closed, how do threat intelligence workers get access to them? And I think Mark actually has provided some insights to these, but feel free to go ahead and try to answer this one.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's all just kind of about trial and error. In my experience, you can obviously Google and start off finding onion links, and then often you'll see in some of those forums that there'll be mentions of other ones. There's obviously some really big ones like raid forums is a good place to start, but it is kind of just about, we're weaving your way through and finding offshoots and other groups, and then some need paid access. So obviously that's going to depend on whether you're doing it as a private person or a company, whether you have legal implications. So one thing to keep in mind is, depending on the group, who's running the group, you've got to be really careful about who you're sending money to, depending on your country as well, because you don't want to be seen as funding a crime organisation or something like that.
Interesting ethics there. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, and moving on, we've got one from Lemuel, which is for Luke, and it says, is CTI-driven red teaming almost like white box pen testing for vulnerability assessments and pen testing?
Yeah, there is a level to it. I mean, ultimately, there's the interactive approach, which I prefer because, I do want to uplift a lot of our clients and the blue team, right? And there is a series of questionnaires you might go through as part of a regulated approach. Siri's just trying to talk to me at the moment. There is a series of questionnaires that might come out. So the regulator might say, hey, do you have these defensive controls, for example, to kind of speed up the process more than anything? Because it's that classic kind of, if an attacker had unlimited time, then, they could do unlimited things, right? Pen testers don't have unlimited time. Red teamers don't have unlimited time because the client only bought us for X amount of days. Now, obviously, a lot of companies try to deliver more value. And it might be like, I'll go a little bit over because there's some stuff there. But generally, you might have another engagement after. But effectively, to answer the question, I would like it to be more white box. But what you're trying to do is you don't want to bring all the blue team into the fold because they know and they will hunt for you. And that has happened in the past where someone wants to kind of, big up their blue team to internal stakeholders, and they let it slip. Inadvertently or not, that a red team was happening. So, the blue team was on guard, sort of thing. So that really comes down to communication.
Sure. Okay, cool. 2 more questions. There's one from Bad Sector that said, how do you actually quote a red team engagement, considering that you say they can last for X amount of days? And are they several more times expensive than pen tests?
Usually, depending on obviously, a lot of red teams, it's difficult to get into, right? You can't just say, I have my OSCP, therefore I can start doing red teams activities. You have to, and this is what I say to the team all the time, you'll be in a situation where you'll be doing the API test, for example, because the vector in might be through their mobile app for some reason, right? Or like that example of AWS keys, you might need to know about AWS. You need to know about cloud, you need to know about AWS, you need to know about mobile, you need to know about infrastructure, you need to know about Active Directory, you need to know wireless, web apps, internal, external inf, satellite technology, OT, SCADA, all these things, drones maybe even as well, right? All about these things, and that comes with experience and years with your bum in a seat, just grinding it out, learning all these things, certifications and stuff. So as a result, it tends to be a little bit more expensive for the specific people that do it. Because with that experience, they kind of, they want to get paid a little bit more as well, just like what Mark was saying, right? I was talking about that 1% increase, right? It's like, well, the CTI team won 10% every year, so I'm actually losing money. So, hopefully that answers the question, right? That's what drives the cost up, and that's what makes it a bit more expensive for the resources. But fundamentally, it's largely driven based on experience. So I'm fortunate enough that I've done a lot of these things. I'll work with people that have done even more than I have, and I can draw on them to say, hey, this type of assessment or these types of scenarios, how long do you think?
Awesome. Okay. No, I think that definitely answered it. And there's plenty more questions. There's just been a stream of them, so we'll go through those. I think there is one more that I might get Mark to hop into as well and maybe share some insight. It almost came through as like a troll question. What is your favorite reporting tool that is not Word? But to be honest, this is talked about a lot, and I'm really interested, especially if you're tracking threat actors or different TTPs, where you would store those. If you're storing everything like that into your own systems, or whether you're actually utilizing an existing third-party one, which is a great tool that people can use themselves. So what I might do is maybe, Mark, if you can have a go yourself, and then we'll go to Molly and Luke as well, if that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, most of it's our own systems. I think, Molly and Luke had it nail on the head with MITRE ATT&CK. I mean, MITRE ATT&CK is awesome. And, we're looking to use that as much as we can. I think everybody's looking to use that. There was a format for threat intel. Sticks used to be previously. It was like kind of supposed to be a common way to share and store threat intel. Didn't really take off. But I think at the moment, MITRE ATT&CK is probably where it's at least from like a consistent tagging perspective.
Cool.
Yeah,
Molly, yep, go ahead.
Sure, I would absolutely echo that as well. I think MITRE ATT&CK's probably the most widely utilized framework, and they're constantly developing that. So as I showed in my slide earlier, they have recently, I think it was only in the last month, they've added the extra sub-techniques, which is really helpful. Same in our organization, we use our own tools. But in terms of mapping and sharing that intel, I think MITRE ATT&CK's a really good way to share that data.
And last and least, me. So there's a few things like MITRE ATT&CK. Absolutely, I'll definitely kind of want to echo that one. But for us as pen testers, what we need, or as red teamers, what we need to kind of help the client identify is how we did it, right? And that's Visio, right? So get your Visio skills up, and that's usually you map out their network, and because you generally have a picture in your head about how the network looks anyway, and you'll worm your way through the network, but then you need to articulate that. So if you just go through, list a whole bunch of host names and IP addresses in a spreadsheet and say, this is what we did, this is when we did it, this is the hash that we used for the exploit or whatever, it really means nothing to them, right? So I'm kind of drawing back onto that debrief session, because that's where you really want to kind of drive a lot of conversations. And if you bring up a Visio diagram of their network and show them how you managed to squirm your way through it, that they say picture 1,000 words and all that, and that really kind of drives it home. Word, 100%. I'm a big Word fanboy, and then potentially even things like Jira tickets as well, so they can actually raise incidents or raise bugs as a result of these activities.
But it was a troll question, so they want us to say Vi or Nano or Pico or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah, what's wrong with Word?
I think markup is where it's at, right? Or markdown, sorry.
What's the one that you publish academic papers with?
LaTeX.
LaTeX? Yeah, that's right, LaTeX. Maybe that was the one. But look, as I've got you all here, honestly, thank you so much. I think it's really rare to have all three of you sitting there and answering questions on a YouTube chat stream. Probably not as common as you would think. So a lot of value there. We'll bundle up some of those questions, and if you want to answer any of them, we'll make them available afterwards. So maybe just, this is a thanks. You can go off stream now, and I'll just close up for the rest of it. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cool.
bye.
Last few little slides, so hopefully you can still see my slides, and I'm just making sure I'm all now. So we've got some prizes. Harry, Y, and Lemuel aren't mentioned here because it wasn't yet, but both of them have won a prize. So if you can just try to get in contact with us on the Slack, I don't think we have you on there yet, or email melbourne@sectalks.org. We also have someone called Corona Teened, and we don't know how to get in touch with them, so they've got themselves a Maltego license. If you can get in touch with us as well through the email. And then we have Wendy and Guile, who both have gotten themselves a Maltego Classic license through emailing. And so great causes for the both of you. Really, really cool to see. And we also have one left over as well. So we'll still wait for those. One or two interesting things during the stream we noticed. Someone said they were watching it while taking a bath. So that's an interesting use case. And someone else restreamed the stream to a stream on Twitch. So it was being restreamed somewhere else. Only one person banned, which is pretty cool and successful for that many people watching, and a lot of different questions. So that's really appreciated. As I said, if you want to give a bit of feedback, it includes a bunch of categories of talks that you might want to see, as well as what you thought about the talks and so forth. Go ahead and fill that in, and we've still got a book and a Maltego license to give away to anyone who does that. We'll randomize it. But thank you so much for joining us. For those who are in Australia, please do go and grab dinner if you haven't already, and hopefully we'll see you next month. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your night.